Hey everyone, and welcome to my BNB Glow channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. True paternity statement. Bridget announces the DNA results, shocking everyone. They would rewrite family histories, ignite new rivalries, and expose an affair so clandestine it had remained hidden for over 2 decades. Before I open this, Bridget began, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the low murmur of anxious conversation. I want everyone to remember that Luna is the innocent party in all of this. She is a wonderful, kind young woman, and that doesn't change, no matter what this paper says. Her gaze swept the room, landing pointedly on Poppy and Bill, before softening as she looked at Luna. The truth can be painful, but living a lie is worse. Are you ready, Luna? Luna could only manage a tiny, jerky nod, her knuckles white as she gripped RJ's hand. With a deep, steadying breath that did little to calm her own racing heart, Bridget slid her finger under the flap of the envelope, the sound obscenely loud in the silent room. She pulled out the single sheet of paper, her eyes scanning the official text, the columns of numbers, and finally, the conclusive statement at the bottom. Her face, usually so open and compassionate, became a carefully controlled mask, but those watching closely saw the blood drain from her cheeks and a flicker of sheer, unadulterated disbelief in her eyes. She looked from the paper to Poppy, then her gaze, wide and stunned, traveled across the room and landed squarely on Bill Spencer. Bill, sensing the shift in attention, raised a cynical eyebrow. "What, Bridget? Don't tell me I'm the daddy," he quipped, his voice laced with his characteristic arrogant humor, treating the entire situation as a joke. Bridget didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, and the silence stretched, becoming heavy, oppressive, charged with a terrifying energy. "Bill," she started, her voice barely a whisper, then she cleared her throat, forcing strength into it. She looked back at the paper, as if to double-check the impossible words, before announcing to the entire room, her voice clear and sharp as shattering glass, "According to the DNA analysis, you are." The 5-word confirmation, "according to the DNA analysis, you are," hung in the air for a moment, not fully comprehended, the syntax itself a small buffer against the shock. Then, the meaning detonated. The room erupted. "What?" The word was torn from multiple throats at once, Ridge's a thunderous boom of pure shock, Brooke's a gasp of horrified realization, and Luna's a strangled cry of confusion. But Bill Spencer. Bill was utterly transformed. All traces of smug amusement vanished, replaced by a look of complete and total stupefaction. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide as saucers, the color draining from his face so rapidly it was as if he'd seen a ghost. He stared at Bridget, then at Poppy, his mind visibly racing, scrambling through the foggy archives of his past, trying to place this woman, this moment, this child. That's impossible," he stammered, uncharacteristically lost for words, his foundation of arrogant certainty crumbling beneath him. But it was Poppy's reaction that confirmed everything. She didn't look triumphant or vindicated, she looked utterly defeated, as if the secret she had carried for a lifetime had finally, physically, crushed her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while Lee stared at her with a mix of fury and grim validation. "I knew it," Lee spat, her voice cold with decades of resentment. "I knew you were lying. All these years." The focus, however, quickly snapped back to the seismic implications of this revelation. Brooke Logan, the woman who had her own long and complicated history with Bill Spencer, both romantically and through her daughter, Hope, was the first to connect the devastating dots aloud. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between a horrified Luna and a shell-shocked RJ. "Oh, my God," she whispered, the words dripping with dread. Luna and RJ, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The room understood. RJ Forrester, Ridge and Brooke's son, had been in a sweet, growing relationship with Luna. They were deeply in love, talking about a future together. And now, in an instant, that future had been annihilated. They were cousins. The genetic truth, cold and unyielding, had rendered their romance not just taboo, but impossible. Luna finally ripped her hand away from RJ's as if his touch had suddenly burned her. She stared at him, her eyes pools of utter horror and revulsion, not for him, but for this situation, for the twisted fate that had befallen them. "No," she whimpered, shaking her head back and forth, "no, no, no, this can't be happening." RJ looked like he'd been physically struck. He stumbled back a step, his face a mask of anguish and confusion. "Cousins?" he breathed, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "We're cousins?" The beautiful, burgeoning love they had nurtured now felt contaminated, unnatural, a sick joke played by the universe. The dream of their future together shattered into a million irreparable pieces right before their eyes, the emotional carnage immediate and absolute. But the shockwaves did not stop there. As Bill Spencer slowly began to process the reality that he had a full-grown daughter he never knew existed, a sweet, intelligent young woman caught in this crossfire, a strange, unfamiliar emotion began to pierce through his shock, a raw, primal, and fiercely protective paternal instinct. He looked at Luna, truly looked at her, not as some abstract result of a forgotten affair, but as his flesh and blood, his child. And seeing her heart shatter over R.J. Forrester ignited the old, familiar Spencer-Forrester feud within him with a new, terrifying ferocity. His stunned silence evaporated, replaced by a low, dangerous growl. "It's over," he declared, his voice cutting through the cacophony of gasps and sobs. He pointed a finger at RJ, who flinched at the venom in his gaze. "You stay away from her. Do you hear me? You are family now, and this thing between you is done. Finished." Rich Forrester, always ready to meet Bill's fire with his own, immediately stepped forward, his body tensed for a confrontation. "You don't get to come in here and start giving orders, Bill. This is a family matter, and you've just been informed of your participation. You don't get to play father now. She is my daughter." Bill roared, the words feeling both alien and profoundly true as he said them. "That makes it my business. I won't have her tangled up with a Forrester, living the same pathetic, drama-filled life you all wallow in." The room devolved into chaos, a shouting match of accusations, denials, and raw grief. Bridget could only stand by, the discarded DNA results in her hand, watching the destruction her announcement had wrought. She had sought to bring clarity, to provide Luna with the truth of her origin, but she had instead unleashed a hurricane. The truth had not set them free, it had trapped them in a new, more gilded cage of biological fact. Poppy's long-buried secret was now out, exposing her lies and forever altering her relationship with her daughter. Bill Spencer, the invincible titan of industry, had been brought to his knees by a paternity test, forced to confront a part of his life he never knew existed and a responsibility he was utterly unprepared for. And most tragically, Luna and RJ, two innocent souls who had found solace in each other, had their love story brutally rewritten into a Greek tragedy, their future stolen by a truth that arrived 2 decades too late. The bold and beautiful facade of their lives had been cracked open, revealing the ugly, complicated, and painfully human reality beneath, and nothing, for any of them, would ever be the same again. The spoiler was not just in the announcement, but in the endless, devastating fallout that had only just begun. DNA test scandal. Bill forged DNA test results. Bill puts Luna in huge trouble. Bold and beautiful. Finn, guided by an inner compass he cannot ignore, pushes for a retest, not because he wants to stir trouble, but because he believes in the sanctity of parenthood. For Finn, the idea of being a father is not a social title but a moral one, an identity built of nightly feedings, scraped knees, whispered lullabies. To let a falsehood stand would be to rob someone of the chance to be fully loved. His plea is simple and devastating, let the science decide. The retest, performed under the watchful eye of both camps, is supposed to be the exorcism of doubt, the algebra that reduces human drama to undeniable numbers. But soap opera heavens do not so easily grant clean endings. The lab is reputable, the technicians professional, and yet the retest results come back with a label that is almost too shockingly explosive. The child is not who the forged papers said. The room gasps, a wineglass tips over as if pushed by the very force of the revelation. Bill's face curdles into something less than human for a beat, the hush of someone who has been unmasked, and then he smiles, because smiling is a reflex he uses to buy time. but smiles have a short half-life. People begin to remember incidents that, in hindsight, make sense: a hushed phone call, a hurried meeting with a private lab, an envelope passed in a parking garage. The moral calculus that allowed Bill to justify his action begins to look like a house of cards, and as the wind of scandal picks up, the structure collapses with a satisfying, terrible completeness. Luna, who had been vilified in whispers as a woman with a precarious past, suddenly finds herself rehumanized in the eyes of those who were willing to look. She is not a perpetrator of deceit but a victim of manipulation, thrust into an impossible position by someone who should have known better. The town rallies, albeit unevenly. Humans are imperfect in their loyalty, and the support she receives is both balm and a mirror reflecting all the ways the community has failed its own. The legal implications are immediate and brutal. Forging a DNA test is not a peccadillo. It is fraud, and in a civilization that likes to think it can rely on systems of proof, such an act is sacrilegious. Prosecutors sharpen their knives, civil suits multiply like spores. Bill's empire, which always seemed invulnerable to moral erosion, begins to feel the tremors of accountability. Board members whisper about fiduciary risk, advertisers cringe, and the press, ravenous, precise, remorseless, circles like vultures. Yet for every outward consequence there is an inward collapse that is harder to adjudicate. Bill sits in his office, surrounded by accolades and the trappings of a life built on public admiration, but the silence there is thick with things unsaid. He has lost something deeper than reputation, the capacity to be believed without reservation. His relationships, those he managed like chess pieces, crumple because trust, once broken, does not easily mend. Part of the tragedy is the revelation that Bill was not simply protecting power. In his own distorted way he tried to play savior, for his own child, for his name, for a family image that mattered to him more than the messy, humane truth. But saviors who lie become dictators in their own stories, and the moral ugliness of that is plain for all to see. The human consequences cascade, estrangements deepen, friendships splinter, and alliances shift like tectonic plates. Luna's close ones circle protectively, but even they cannot fully shield her from the sensation that her life has been redesigned by someone else's fear. Children, always the collateral of such battles, are confused. They sense the adult storms and internalize a fear that is ineffable but lasting. For Luna, the worst moments are not the courtroom theatrics nor the legal jargon, but the nights when she lies awake imagining what her child will think one day, what it will mean to explain that for a time the world believed a falsehood about their origin, that adults they trusted manipulated facts in a way that left a scar. She wonders how identity will be rebuilt, what conversations will be needed to heal the void, and whether the bedrock of familial love can be reset after such a tremor. Then there is the question of forgiveness, which in soap dramas is rarely linear. Can someone like Luna forgive Bill? And can Bill forgive himself? Both questions are minefields. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it should not be confused with absolution. For some characters the idea of forgiveness is a bridge to be built slowly, every board hammered with care. For others it is an illusion, a convenience used to avoid the grinding work of accountability. Bill seeks to bargain, apologies, donations, public statements. He tries to harness his resources, chambers packed with influencers and PR strategists, to perform contrition. But true remorse is not manufactured in conference rooms, it is a private, corrosive heat that either transforms or destroys. The boardroom performance of a humbled magnate rings hollow to those who were hurt most. And there are people who will never accept his apology no matter how he phrases it, those whose lives were directly jeopardized by his deception, who measure harm not in words but in the consequences that followed. In the midst of the legal battles, the emotional theater continues. A man who once had more power than he knew finds himself in the peculiar position of needing support. He reaches, clumsily, to his family for solace. But family, for all its loyalty, is not a rubber stamp for every bad decision. Some relatives, appalled, distance themselves, others offer conditional compassion that feels like a bargaining chip. Meanwhile, Luna's life begins to reconstitute itself around new constants, truth, the messy work of repair, and the people who stood with her when it mattered. Finn becomes an unsentimental hero, not flashy, not performing for a camera, but resolute. He sits with Luna in waiting rooms, signs paperwork, and when the child needs a quiet hand at 2 in the morning, he is there. These are the small actions that soap operas love because they are the secret scaffolding of love, the real, oft-ignored work. Fans and viewers within the world and outside of it roar with opinions. Social media, always quick to pulverize nuance, divides into camps that demand blood or mercy. The commentary is brutal but illuminating. It forces characters to see themselves as others see them, and sometimes that reflection is the first step toward change. Meanwhile, investigative journalists do what they do best. They follow the money trail as if it were a narrative map. They trace payments to third-party labs, to shell companies, to intermediaries hired for the express purpose of obfuscation. Each ledger's entry is a breadcrumb that, when followed, leads inexorably back to a man who thought himself above reproach. The legal system, meanwhile, prepares for a spectacle: arraignments, depositions, sworn testimony where Bill will be forced to answer for a catalogue of choices, but beyond the courtrooms, there is the human calculus of redemption. Will the public forgive him? Will clients return? Will employees feel safe enough to stay? The answers are complicated and will be negotiated in months, perhaps years. There is also the quiet subplot of those who enabled Bill, people who, whether out of fear, loyalty, or ambition, helped him in ways that now look like moral failure. They too must contend with their choices. Some will confess and seek to redeem themselves, while others will deny until denial is their only survival strategy. It is here that the show's moral anatomy is most fascinating, not just in the big villain and the wronged woman, but in the shades of gray where ordinary people make small compromises that accumulate into the extraordinary harm. Luna's circle cracks open to reveal heroes and cowards, saints and opportunists, each reflecting back a different version of the town's soul. The climactic courtroom scenes are as theatrical as one might expect, testimony that is sometimes prayerful, sometimes vicious, witnesses that cry, sputter, or remain inscrutable. Bill's attorney tries to paint a picture of plausible deniability, of imperfect process, of human frailty. But the evidence, the metadata, the payments, the chain of custody breaches, speaks in a language that is hard to spin. The verdict, when it comes, will be more than a legal judgment. It will be a moral ledger balancing harm and intent, negligence and malice. Yet even as the courthouse drama reaches its crescendo, the most intimate reckonings happen in living rooms, conversations between ex-lovers, children asking why adults lie, grandparents shaking their heads at how money can warp judgment. Some relationships survive because they are rebuilt on greater honesty, others collapse, revealing fissures that had long been present but were obscured by habit and convenience. For Luna, the path forward is both clearer and more complicated, clearer in the sense that the truth removes the fog of suspicion, and complicated because now she must repair the small daily things: how to explain to a child the complexities of deceit, how to integrate new family dynamics, and how to live in a world where the public sometimes refuses to forget. In the end, the scandal will have created ripples that reshape careers, marriages, and reputations. Bill will lose some battles and perhaps win others. Dignity, once lost, is hard currency to regain. He may make reparations, financial settlements, public apologies, philanthropic gestures, but the deeper work of regaining trust is a private and arduous thing. Luna may find new strength, a hard, luminous resilience forged in the furnace of betrayal, and she will discover allies she did not expect and face enemies she once thought friends. The show holds a mirror up to modern life, how we rely on institutions to mediate truth, how easily those institutions can be corrupted by those willing to abuse them, and how ultimately human beings, messy, contradictory, capable of both tender devotion and monstrous rationalization, must pick up the pieces. And so the scandal becomes more than a plot device. It is a study in the anatomy of lies and the messy, often beautiful process of recovery. In the quietest moments, after the cameras are gone and the headlines fade, the characters sit with their choices, some emboldened by the knowledge that truth prevailed, others broken by what they did to get there. Bill will have to live with the knowledge that his attempt to control fate only made him smaller. Luna will have to teach her child that identity is not a paper but a life lived in loving acts. Finn will continue to be a steady presence, not because he seeks glory but because he knows what parenthood demands. The town will go on, Because it always does, but the stain of the scandal will remain as a scar that maps where hearts were once forced to harden and where they later learned, slowly and painfully, to soften again.